Hey everyone, welcome back to my workshop once again. I'm Kara, and today I'm going to show you how to paint leather like this. For this video, I'll be demonstrating the painting and experimentation process of painting black, brown, and red leather in my personal style. This isn't exactly a tutorial, so feel free to experiment with this however you want. I bought myself 3 minis that have fitting cloaks and capes that I thought would work well for a leather. A Black Templar's Marshal, a regular Battle Sister, and a Phobos Librarian. So let's get into it. I like to start off my painting with a slightly lighter colour than the intended midtone, as most of this technique relies on progressively darker washes and shades over time. For the brown, I used Mournfang Brown. On the red, Mephiston Red, and on the black, a mix of Abaddon Black and Dark Reaper. I made sure to use 2 to 3 thin base coats to build up a solid base coat with a smooth surface. After my initial base coats on the leather parts, I thought to myself, I wonder if base coating the whole mini would add more depth to the leather. So I spent a little time adding the main base coats to the minis to really help show how this technique looks with their colours. Afterwards, I moved back onto my main focus, adding the first shading into the recesses and inner folds of the leather. I used Carroburg Crimson for the red, Norn Oil for the black, and Agrax Earthshade for the brown. Each of these were thinned down to a thin, glaze-like consistency before covering most of the surface. I should say now that this process requires a little patience. You've got to wait for your paint to dry completely, and make sure it doesn't pool up. I came back with the same mixes as before. On the red, I coated most of the leather, leaving only the points I wanted brightest untouched. On the black and brown, I painted those slightly differently, focusing more on the recesses of the cloaks, once again making sure nothing pools. This time, I used less diluted mixes of the same shade paints for a darker layer on the red and the brown, making sure to focus mostly on the undersides and recessed areas, avoiding covering most of the cloak on each one. Now, as you all know, I'm kinda stupid, and didn't exactly think through the black painting process. And as I couldn't go darker with my colours, I had to go brighter, mixing up a dark blue-grey and painting that everywhere I thought that the light would catch the cloak. Admittedly, I did this a little too bright, but because of this process, all I needed to do was add more washes and shades later on to darken that back down to a natural colour. Once those were all dry, I returned to the red cape with a more diluted Carroburg Crimson wash, and covered the whole cloak to help blend all of the previous washes together. With the black coat, I returned with a watered down black shade, and reapplied that to the darker parts of the cloak, helping to blend and dull down the brighter highlight from before. I also came back to the brown leather, applying a darker coat of Agrax Earthshade to the undersides, recesses, and details of the cloak. I gave all of the recesses on each model's leather a whole coat of thin now Norn Oil, and guided that into any folds and creases with the intention of bringing all the colours together a little better. Then I began bringing back more lighting to each model and covering the highlighted areas with thin coats of my highlight and midtone colours. This helped to redefine the raised areas and add more contrast to each mini. After that, I fully covered each one with another thin down layer of Norn Oil before using a damp brush to swipe away any of the wash from the main highlighted areas. Using a stippling technique and some light layering, I added more brightness to those highlights. I felt it was important to have a stark contrast on the material in order to draw someone's attention to the bright colours and blends of each miniature. Note that I avoided this step with the black cloak in order to preserve its darker colour scheme. I decided to add to my highlights once more, but this time around I used super bright colours for my smaller and brighter highlights to add more contrast and depth to the red and black leathers. After that, I went to the edges and bottom of each cloak, stippling on an outline to show wear and tear. I made sure to add slightly brighter and darker colours to each one, just to make it look more natural and random. I then reused the same colours to add scratches and scrapes along the surfaces of each piece of leather with a very thin brush. With that finished, I moved on to my final step. I used a slightly gloss varnish over the entire surface of all the leathers. This helps sell the effect of a mildly shiny surface. Do be careful with this step though, as brushing too much can potentially strip away thinner coats of your highlights and shades. And that's that. With 3 different colours of leather cloaks and one happy me, I'm very proud of these even though they're not perfect. If you followed along with this and painted your own miniatures with the same or similar style, be sure to tag me on Twitter or Instagram and show me your work. Links will be in the description below. Thank you all for watching, feel free to leave me some feedback on my content, and if you're feeling fancy, be sure to go ahead and subscribe. It's been a pleasure having you in my workshop. Until next time, my friends.